Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and I am back today to talk more shit. Specifically about the Schiit Modius E, a $229 US fully balanced digital to analog converter. I bought this. I was an owner of the original Schiit Modius, which I had bought used, and that one crapped out on me. Right, the USB inputs, both the power and the signal on that one eventually went out. It was a few years old, so that kind of thing happens. And I knew this was out there, and so I picked it up to replace what the Modius was doing for me as kind of an under $300 US reference DAC. So what I've been listening to it for a while now, and so it's time to give my thoughts on this. So stick around after shameless self-promotion to see if it does indeed fill that role of being a under $300 US reference DAC for me. Here we go.
Hello. I'm one of the reasons that Wave Theory can't spend all of his money on audio gear. He wants you to know that your support is vital for keeping the channel running. So if you enjoy Wave Theory's bussin' review riz and no-cap review style, and want to encourage him to stay in the basement so I don't have to listen to his dad jokes as much, like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also send him a donation on PayPal or sign up for the Patreon. Links are in the description. Now on to the review.
The take-home message on this is that yes, this is a reference caliber DAC under $300 US. Schiit is remarkably consistent at creating high value and high performing products here in this like budget and budget enthusiast kind of tier, because most of the stuff that they make, call it under even say $1,000 US, just as often standard setting in terms of the sound quality that it provides, the build quality that it provides, and all of that for the price. Like, they are consistently excellent in that way, and this piece comfortably continues that legacy. It does have a bit of a stripped down feature set, but in terms of its performance and the, the value of the performance that you get for the money, big time thumbs up, so well done to Schiit. Now, let's unpack why I say all of those things. All right, so again, right about $230 US. The feature set on this is rather stripped down. It is built around an ESS ES9028 DAC chip. It is a fully balanced. Its decoding options are rather limited. You get PCM decoding up to 24-bit 192 kilohertz. That's it. No DSD, no MQA or anything of that nature. Now, the MQA part is probably not a concern to very many people anymore, as Tidal was like the last bastion of MQA, and they are phasing that out. Now, the lack of DSD, it may affect you or it may not. Like, DSD, you basically have to have local files. I am not aware of any DSD streaming. You either have to own DSD files or SACDs, have an SACD player to go along with those, or you have some sort of conversion in a software player that you use at the user end that converts PCM into DSD for decoding. If you are one such person, then this device is not going to be for you. If you are an upsampler, you like to use HQ player or something of that nature and upsample your files to really high bit rates, then this DAC is not for you. Right, but if its feature set works for you, then it really is an excellent option. So the build, pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's got the footprint in terms of size that matches the midguard. The chassis actually matches the midguard's chassis all there. If you have the old Magnus, okay, this matches that as well, but it has the same footprint as like the Asgard 3, the Jotunheim series, the Lyre series, the Bifrost series, and so forth. Like, it's got that kind of design to it and the size and all that. It's fairly light, although it is fairly well made. Like, it's got an all aluminum construction around it and all of that too. So, build, going to be pretty quick. You have a single button on the front panel here that is an input select button, and then you've got LEDs to indicate the input that you have selected. Around back, we have the balanced and single-ended analog outputs here. Then we have three flavors of SPDIF input. You get the AES, which is basically SPDIF over a balanced XLR connector. You get RCA coaxial input, and then you get Toslink fiber optic input here. Then we have a now USB-C connector for data and then one for power right here. So this is the USB audio input, which can power the device. This can run off of just straight USB power from your computer if you plug it in that way, but then they Schiit did thoughtfully add a power port here, which is also USB-C, that you can power this device, and so that you can plug this into a phone or an iPad or something of that nature and not draw down the power on that. And it really does not have a huge power draw anyway. Like, this is a 5-volt DC, half amp input there. So basically, all you really need is like a phone charging brick, okay, to power this thing with external power if you want. Okay, but I mean, that's it. That's the build and the features and the decoding and all of that. So it's finely built. It's got enough features on it, like the inputs and all of that on it are nice. The USB input here uses Schiit's Unison USB solution, which is their in-house USB implementation. And I have found Unison to be pretty solid overall, and one of the strengths of the Unison implementation from Schiit is that they tend to handle noisier USB sources a little bit more gracefully than some other USB implementations out there. So if you are plugging this in via USB to a desktop computer and all that, and desktop computers, particularly big gaming rigs, can be quite noisy, the Unison USB will help that some. It's not going to cure it completely, but it handles that kind of noisy source better than like Amonero and XMOS and some other USB implementations that have been on the market there. So that's something to keep in mind here with this unit as well. But let's turn our attention then to sound, and let's start by with test gear. And I'll do this a little bit differently because I used this unit a little bit differently than I have in some contexts. Like when it first got here, I just took it to my desk at work. I grabbed the Schiit Midgard amplifier to pair it with and connect it via XLR balanced connections there. And then to power it there at work, I just used a phone charging brick. Actually, what I think I have there, yes, this is correct. Like I have a power cord plugged into my power strip at work, where it's the power cord for my Microsoft Surface Pro 4 laptop, which has a USB output power on its transformer pack, the brick on the power brick part there. So it's just basically a phone charging kind of thing, and I just plug that in via USB-C into the power input here. For the source there, I used my iPad, which was running Rune Arc, and this is a 10th generation iPad, and so I just used an AudioQuest Forest USB-C to USB-C cord to go into the USB-C input of the Modius here. And then the headphone that I used in that setting was the closed back Focal Radiance. Okay, so that was one system that I tried this on. Here at home, I did a very intense critical listening session to try to hear the differences between the balanced and single-ended outputs here, and for that I again used the Midgard, but connected both the balanced and single-ended inputs there, or connections on that one, so then I could flip back and forth, and yes, I would have to turn the volume control on there, but more on that in a moment. The iPad using Rune Arc was again the source there, and the headphone that I used for that was the Hi-Fi Min Ananda Nano. Then I also put this on my main desk and connected it to some high-end amplifiers that I have in at the moment, such as the Hi-Fi Min Golden Wave Prelude and the Ferrum Ore with Hypsos. And then I used the Hi-Fi Min Susvara and an original Focal Utopia as the headphones there to like really dive into and give this thing a critical listen. And while it was on my desk, I also powered it from a small green computer linear power supply, which I can link to down in the description. The unit that I use is a little bit older than what they're selling right now, but I think they're going to be mostly the same. Okay, what did all of that show me here? And again, I'm going to come down to I was really thoroughly impressed with the performance of this unit overall. I think the strengths of Schiit's house sound made it into this unit. And it's just a very high performer for the price. And I do think that the balanced output is stronger than the single-ended output, so that's something to keep in mind. So let's go into all of this. The general sound that you get here is mostly neutral. Schiit devices of the past, particularly some of their DACs, have kind of leaned a little bit warmer and smoother in their sound. This one is a little bit more just like straight neutral. Doesn't really emphasize a whole lot of any of the frequency range in there compared to others. The tonal balance in terms of relationships between fundamental frequencies and their harmonics is also pretty strong. There is a little bit of lack of control up top in the treble where it can get sibilant just a little bit here and there. That's very common for a DAC down at this price point, but I mean, relative to its competition at the price, I think it's above average in that ability, or below average in terms of the severity of that problem, if you want to word it that way. All right, but the strengths of the Schiit house sound that I mentioned in there, like, to me, have long been like their ability to do timbre, to make things sound like the real thing. Voices sound like voices, and pianos like pianos, drums like drums, guitars like guitars, you know, those kinds of things. Like, that has long been a strength of their house sound, and that made it in here too. I was quite impressed with the timbre. The sound staging and the holography of the spatial presentation, also a strength of their house sound. That made it in here too. You get a fairly large, but also for the price, really surprisingly three-dimensional and holographic spatial presentation here, with good imaging and separation laterally, and more depth than I expected. Depth and layering, meaning in this direction, than I expected for a DAC of this price. I think it took a step forward there as well. Okay, from previous generations, but then also just, again, that reflects the strengths of the Schiit house sound, and this one has it. And then the other one that stood out to me that, again, has been a strength of Schiit's house sound that is in here is the dynamics and the impactfulness of the sound. Like, it is hard hitting. It's got some good slam in the bass. It's got good snap on snare drum strikes and that sort of thing. So it's got a very, like, you know, it's got that active, lively, and energetic kind of dynamics presentation. Now, what also stood out to me was the amount of resolution present here for the price. Schiit has been a company where their house sound is competent and solid in the detail retrieval / resolution category, but not necessarily price point leading most of the time. This one is in the running. I have not heard every single sub $300 DAC out there, but I have to say, but based on what I heard, it is in the running as also being the most resolving DAC at that price range, okay, in that price range as well, because the amount of detail that I was getting out of this, like, really surprised me, and pleasantly so. Okay, the zizziness, the sound of bows being dragged across strings came out really clearly. Room reverbs were clear, and like, if you listen to a live recording, like, room sounds and crowd noise and that sort of thing was also pulled out really well and presented here. Now, the detail is also not forward or thrust at me. It is appropriately present in terms of, like, how noticeable it is, so it didn't become fatiguing for me or anything, but, like, I would have to add the resolution in as a strength of this DAC in a way that I have not done so with Schiit gear before. So that really jumped out to me here as an improvement of this particular unit over the previous generation and in their house sound. All right, so, I mean, you put all of that together, excellent timbre, excellent resolution, spatial holography, the fun and impactful dynamics, and that sort of thing, and you just get a really solid unit. It performed well across a wide range of musical genres. I mean, I hit it with, you know, really heavy metal and, like, really big scale classical works, some jazz, some hip hop, some EDM, okay, all just about any subgenre of rock and roll and all of that. Like, I threw most things at it and it passed the test with flying colors every time. I was really quite impressed with that. All right, so, like, what are the imperfections? Like, what's the yeah, but? What can I complain about, if you will, here? Well, again, it's worth reminding you about the limited feature set. If you need DSD, this is not the DAC for you. If you are interested in upsampling, this is not the DAC for you, okay? So those are things to keep in mind. Also, like, it is just a DAC. It is not a preamp. There is no volume control on this thing. You get a fixed line level output, okay, on here. So if you want to use this as a preamp for desk speakers, you've got a nice headphone setup or whatever, and then you have desktop speakers to go with it, you cannot do volume control with this. So that's another thing to keep in mind here. All right. I also like this is both a thing that I was impressed about and also like potential drawbacks of this particular unit if you're thinking about buying it that I haven't mentioned already. It does scale up with quality of power. So what I mean is, like, if you just power this directly from your PC's USB output, okay, it sounds decent, but it takes a small step of sonic improvement if you plug it into external USB power. Just get the charging brick for your phone as an example, or use the USB outputs that you find on power strips anymore. Like, I tried that approach too with this. And either way, you're going to get a subtle sonic improvement. It's going to get a little bit cleaner, it's going to be a little bit quieter, and those dynamics are going to be a little bit more impactful. And because it's cleaner and it's quieter, some of the subtle little details of the resolution and like that spatial holography, particularly the separation of sounds in space from each other, is going to come out a little bit more. Okay? Again, because it's cleaner and quieter, those subtle little details don't get lost in the noise as much. Okay, so there is a benefit to just using basic power on this thing. But I also noticed a big performance improvement when I used that SGC LPS. Much more dynamics came through, much more resolution and all of that came through, much more spatial holography, and improved timbre really jumped forward there as well. So I'll also add here that for a time I used my Singer SU6 as a DDC and then like use the coaxial input on here, and like the combination of using that DDC and then also using the LPS on this really lifted the performance of this unit pretty high. Right? I did a direct comparison with the Bifrost 2/64, and with the LPS and with the DDC, this thing was just right hot on the heels of the Bifrost 2 in terms of the maximum level of performance. Now, this was comparing the coaxial input of this and the coaxial input of the Bifrost 2, both connected to the Singer SU6 DDC, which would have also been fed by a Sonor Ultra Rendu streamer, okay, used as a Rune endpoint. And the Bifrost 2 was just slightly more resolving. It was a little bit more impactful in the dynamics yet, like the sub bass was a little bit more present and a little bit more hard hitting, all that. And then like the Bifrost 2 was also just a little bit more overall refined in its sound. But this was really, really close to it. Again, in that specific situation of using a high quality DDC and a nice LPS to power this thing. Okay, so I mean, they were very, very close to each other. I would still take the Bifrost 2/64 in that setting in terms of like what's actually better, but in terms of like the price to performance ratio, this was the better option in that specific setting, which I think very few people are actually going to do, but help me see that the DAC in here is really good. Okay. When I switched to checking USB input versus USB input of the Bifrost 2 and this one in comparison, the Bifrost 2's performance took a noticeable step forward ahead of the Modius E here. So one of the things that you pay for going from the Modius E up to the Bifrost level is that the Unison USB implementation on the Bifrost 2 is actually noticeably superior than the Modius E because it's a more expensive unit, so a little bit more design and pricing went into that. And also, the Bifrost has a galvanically isolated USB connection where I don't believe that the USB implementation on this unit is galvanically isolated, and that shows up. The Bifrost 2 was cleaner, more resolving, that dynamic impactfulness was there. It just was an overall more coherent and complete and realistic, convincing kind of sound than what this one did from its USB input. And I should say that the source there for both of these would have been my iPad using USB Forest USB cables, both of 1.5 meters in length. Okay, so very close in terms of what it's capable of to the Bifrost 2, but the Bifrost 2, again, like it has an internal power supply that is of high quality, so you don't need to provide external power, and it has the higher quality USB implementation on it, even though it does not have an AES input where this one does. So, like I said, what are the potential drawbacks of this one? And it's like the DAC portion of this on its own, just the DAC section is really capable. can sound really excellent for its price, but it is held back a little bit by the lack of an internal power supply and the non-galvanically isolated USB implementation. And if I'm wrong about that, if this is galvanically isolated, I apologize to the audience and to Schiit for not getting that figured out before this. I did not read that it was on their website. And I believe in the past, the Modius units and the Modi units have not had galvanically isolated USB inputs. But even if it is not to the level that is done in the Bifrost, because like that performance gap was noticeable there, USB to USB. Okay, so again, are those drawbacks to this unit? I mean, for the price, maybe not, because even with the USB connection as is and just using a power brick for power that you already have, this is like in the running to be, you know, it's on an elite tier, I should say, in terms of quality of DAC, right, under $300 US. So it's not an overall deal breaker for most people, I think. Other comparisons that are potentially out there could include the Geshelli Labs J2 and J2S DAC, which I've also reviewed. And I didn't get a chance to do a direct A/B between this and any of those units, but like they're going to be a little bit more similar in terms of their sound signature, I think. Like, again, this one is a little bit more neutral in its tuning and in its voicing than the previous Modius was, which that one tilted a little bit warmer. Okay, but in terms of, and I'm betting that the USB implementation on this one, just like the previous Modius, is a little bit more noise friendly and does a little bit better job of pulling the signal out of the audio signal out of a noisy USB connection than the Amonero module is on those Geshelli J2s. The J2 probably has a little bit, maybe, I should say maybe, has a slightly higher overall performance ceiling on it. Maybe. Okay, they're going to stage a little bit differently and all of that, but I mean, I'm saying all of this to say that you really can't make a bad decision between the J2, a J2S, or this unit. They're going to be a little bit different from each other, but they are going to be very much neck and neck in terms of their performance, okay, overall. I just got in to the point where I haven't even opened it yet, but that's going to be the SMSL DO100 Pro, which I believe is going for about $220 US and is a balanced DAC as well. As you see, I haven't even opened the box yet. So that review is going to come up soon, and then I will do a more thorough comparison between that and the Modius E when that arises. But last thing we need to talk about then, and this is a potential drawback that we'll come back to, is the performance gap between the balanced output and the single-ended output. It's there, right? When I did this test, and again, this is with the Midgard and the Ananda Nano, and like I would have to change the volume knob. It took about 2.5 to 3 hours of clock position on the potentiometer of the Midgard to balance the levels between the two. So I'd have to switch and then balance again and then try to listen. So there's going to be some caveats that come with that method there, but it honestly didn't really take all that long for me to pull out that the balanced output is superior. It is cleaner. It is a little bit more dynamically impactful. It has a little bit more natural timbre to it, a little bit smoother tone to it. And the sound stage is a bit more coherent, also bigger. And there's more resolution there. Like listening to a couple of tracks, I definitely noticed right away when I'd switch from the balance to single-ended that I was just missing some, or bring the volume back up, that I was missing some resolution and the ability to place like instruments in the sound field a little bit going from balance to the single-ended. So there is a performance gap there. And the other thing that I noticed that I'll add in here is that the sibilance that I mentioned earlier in the video is under less control from the single-ended output than it is from the balanced output. So I was just getting sharper S's and T's and that sort of thing more often from the single-ended output than I was from the balanced output. So that's another thing that I noticed. Now, is the single-ended output bad? No. I would say Given the price of this unit and all that, it is pretty solid, but it is not up to the standard that the balanced output sets for this device. There is a noticeable decrease in performance there. And that could matter because in this price range, there are a number of single-ended headphone amps and speaker amps out there, such as, like I just reviewed recently, the X-Duo TA66 tube amp, like Schiit's own Valhalla line. Their Lyre amps and like that sort of thing, those are all single-ended only inputs. So that kind of thing could matter depending on what your system needs are. All right, but it's worth reiterating that the Modius E is a reference caliber performer under $300 US. Schiit just keeps knocking it out of the park down in this like budget and mid-5 price range where their gear is just really high performing and really high value down in that range. And again, they just do that with such consistency, and this is no different in that regard. I really enjoyed listening to this unit, and yeah, it's going to be the DAC that I compare other under $300 DACs to as they come in for review. So if you can deal with its slightly limited feature set, the sound is really good. All right, thanks for watching. I am Wave Theory. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment if you haven't done that yet. Check out my PayPal and my Patreon and look for ways you can support the channel that way. Thanks again for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.